Yeah, because the Liberal Democrats are calling on the new government to ditch those proposals and reverse the change to inheritance tax. Their Rural Affairs spokesperson is Tim Farron, and he joins us now from Westminster. Good morning to you. So you're not saying taper it or stagger it, you're saying just don't do this at all?
I think it's a deeply damaging proposal. We've seen from what Bella was just saying just now, that farmers, so many of them, I mean, for example, in my constituency, earning significantly less than the minimum wage, in some cases nothing at all, and yet technically sitting on an asset that's worth a significant amount of money. And so the only way that people can then pay the inheritance tax is to literally get rid of the farm. So what happens? The corporates buy it, as Bella was saying. We end up with private equity firms taking on this farmland and not farming it, not producing food. So it is cruel, it's unfair, but it's also incredibly stupid. If you think about it, Britain is only able at the moment to produce 55% of its own food. In an uncertain world, to be reducing our ability to feed ourselves in this very unfair and cruel way is not just morally wrong, it's also stupid.
So where else would that money come from?
Well, if we lose farming, we end up losing our ability to feed ourselves, and that costs us a vast amount of money. And the Liberal Democrats have set out in our manifesto, which was endorsed by many of the private and independent assessors as adding up. We would, for example, have closed the loophole that gave the banks back a massive tax cut under the last government. So there are ways of paying for this, but this will not raise the money the government thinks it's going to, and it will cause devastation in the countryside. As I say, I mean, I did a little study last night talking to a friend of mine, an accountant who'd done case studies of 4 farms in Cumbria. Only in one of them, all of them would have been affected by this. All of them would lose the farm, they couldn't afford to pay it. Only one of them was the farm actually earning above the minimum wage. 2 of them earning less than the minimum wage, 1 of them earning nothing at all. So the consequences for the Lake District, for example, means that that beautiful landscape no longer gets farmed, and that obviously has an impact on what the landscape looks like, but it also reduces our ability to produce food. And any government that isn't thinking about how it produces food and how it increases our ability to do that is a government that's letting not just farmers down, but the country as a whole.
We heard from Steve Reed, the Environment Secretary, in that report saying that, you know, farmers, families also use the roads, and they use our hospitals, and they use schools in villages and transport links. And if we and they want those things to be funded properly and better in the future, then money has to come, fairly, they would say, from the wealthiest farms in the country.
Yeah, and farmers do pay their taxes. It's a nonsense to say that they don't pay their taxes. But farmers are also in a situation where they are sitting on an asset that can only be used for producing food. And if they are forced to sell it in order to just, survive and pay the inheritance tax, then that business not only leaves their hands, but it also leaves productive farming. Let's just think about this. Bella also talked about something very, very, very important, and that is the mental health crisis amongst farming. You just picture this, imagine it. You're the 5th or 6th generation to have farmed that farm yourself, and because of this and other changes from this and the last government, you're sat staring down the barrel of being the last person in your family to farm that valley, for example. The farm goes on your watch. Now let's just imagine what that does to your mental health. You're being told, despite feeding the country, despite looking after our environment, despite protecting our towns and cities from flooding, that you're not doing enough, and the thing that you would have to do that would be enough is to cash in the farm so some private equity firm can take it on you. How is that just? How is that moral? There is nothing progressive about scrubbing out British family farming and handing it over to the city.
The Environment Secretary and the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility both agree that it's only about 500 of the wealthiest landowners in the country who will be affected by this change. Do you accept that figure?
No, utter rubbish. DEFRA's own figures, actually, if you look back a week or so, they keep changing them, showed that in my constituency alone, 440 farms will be directly affected, many of whom are run by people on earning significantly less than the minimum wage.
But if you take into account, sorry to interrupt, but if you do take into account the other tax reliefs that are possible and combining, for example, spouses' allowance, that's how they calculate that it's only 500.
Which makes all sorts of completely stereotyped assumptions about what farming families look like, and that is nonsense. What has not been covered is the fact that maybe a third of all farms, slightly more in my constituency, are tenanted farms who are not directly affected, but when their landlord starts to restructure their business to take account of all this, what happens is a Lakeland clearances of tenanted farms right across the country. So you know full well, don't you, that the big guys will find ways around this and they will survive. This will not hurt them. But the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of small family farms and tenanted farms who will be affected by this makes this a reactionary move. A Labour Party in government that claims to be on the side of working people is damaging some of the hardest working and poorest people in our country, and they happen to be the people who care for our countryside and our environment and feed us. Those people need valuing, and today I want to stand shoulder to shoulder with them against a government which followed a previous government that let them down so very, very badly.
Tim Farron from the Lib Dems, thank you for joining us here on Breakfast.